I'm Jarrett.
I'm Hope. We go to LCBC Hazleton. So I strayed away from faith for a long time. I knew that there was a higher power, but I didn't put a label on it, so to speak. I went through some pretty rough times in my life and came out on the other end, and I felt solid in almost every single aspect of my life. And then I met Jarrett, and I knew he was raised in a church setting, and I knew that God played a part in his life because he had spoken about it on more than one occasion when we had conversations.
Didn't want to push on anything, and I wanted to go back to church because it was a big part of my life.
A lot of the churches around here seem just not something that we would feel comfortable with, or myself personally, I would feel comfortable with. So I was working at a used car dealership with Jeff Baisberg. They live here, Jeff and Sarah, and he and I had talked about religion before, but we didn't dive into it. And one day he goes, "Hey, no pressure. I just want to let you know, like, my church does this Christmas service." And I was like, to me, it was interesting timing. The coworker went and got the invitation for me and gave it to me, and I showed Jarrett, and I was like, "Look, they have all these services at this time and this time and this time." And
she had mentioned to me about going to the Christmas Eve service, and I was like, "Is it like a Christmas cantata?" Or
I was like, "I don't know what that is." So
I guess we can go. We'll check it out, see what happens. And as soon as we pull up, and at Hazleton, they had the neon signs and everything.
That was what threw us first. It was in a diner. We thought we were at the wrong place. We were like,
that can't be. And you see the big LCBC sign. It's like, all right, well, this is the place. But we walked in right as the band started playing. I was like, this is not a cantata. Like, this is awesome.
Once we started going to LCBC, I could relate the messages that they were saying every Sunday in some aspect of our life, my life, anything. There were so many powerful messages that were like, how did he do that? How did he relate my life into something with Jesus? And it was amazing. It was really, really amazing to finally feel like we found our home. This tiny little piece of paper started it all. It was our key that we needed to a door that we didn't even know existed.
There's so much I love about Hope and Jarrett's story, but one of the lines I love towards the end there is that this little piece of paper started it all. And part of the reason that just kind of fires me up a little bit is I just think about, and we're kind of dreaming about, what stories are we going to get to hear a year from now or 2 years from now, who, because you handed an invitation, a tiny little piece of paper, you handed it to someone, you said, "Man, just come to our Christmas gatherings." What might that unlock in people's lives and the potential of that? And what stories are we going to get to hear? Just to kind of put a little bit of a cherry on top of Hope and Jarrett's story. Last weekend was baptism weekend, if you were here, and Hope's daughter, Maddie, actually got baptized at our Hazleton location. That's Maddie right there. And when she walked down the atrium, she got swarmed by her life group of middle school girls. And so here's the thing that gets me excited by this is you don't even know, like, this could unlock generational changes, right? This could unlock changes for the future of generations. And so, man, just way to go on inviting and having the courage to say, "Man, just come with me to one of our Christmas gatherings," because that's all we're responsible for, is just to make the invitation. Jesus is responsible to change people, but we're responsible to just make an invitation to follow him. It's just kind of amazing to see what's been happening here. And, you know, our church started with this conviction and with this mission and with this passion to see more people know Jesus, to introduce more and more people to Jesus Christ so that more people would understand the transformative love of God revealed in Jesus. And we've been seeing God write an amazing story at our church. And so I just want to take a moment, actually, before we jump into the message today, just kind of talk about some family business. And so if you're here for the very first time, you get to sit in on some kind of a family business meeting here for a second. But I want to talk about some things. None of this is going to be news to you. If you've been around for the last couple of weeks recently, then you've heard us talking about some of this. And so I just want to remind you of some of the things that we've seen God doing here at our church. And also, I want to talk about some opportunities that are ahead of us, opportunities that we want to seize in order to see more people know Jesus. And in particular, I want to talk about this because we have a vote next week. If you're a partner here, a vote to pursue these opportunities. And so let me just back up real quick and just tell you what we've seen God do here over the last 3 years. If you think about 36 months ago, that's it. So just 3 years ago, 36 months ago, this was the footprint of our church at the time. We had, at that point, 7 locations, primarily across southeastern Pennsylvania, eastern Pennsylvania. And so that was kind of the footprint of our church 36 months ago. Now, today, this is the footprint of our church. So in the last 36 months, we've launched 5 new locations. We've relocated one of them, and it's been pretty crazy to think about all that God is doing. So I'm going to just point out a few of these. This is our Berks location. We launched our Berks County location in Leesport 3 years ago. I'll tell you a little bit more about that here in just a couple of minutes. We launched our Waynesboro location, and we're reaching now through our Waynesboro location. We're reaching down into Maryland, into Frederick, Maryland, and in Hagerstown, Maryland, so seeing a regional influence there. We launched our Hanover location. They actually just celebrated a 1-year birthday a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things they did to celebrate, they launched a 3rd gathering on a Sunday morning because they needed some space, and so it's pretty amazing to see what God is doing there. We launched our Hazleton location. You just heard Hope and Jared's story. They're an example of what God's doing at our Hazleton location. We actually moved our Columbia Montour location about 18 months ago or so, and so they were up in Berwick. We moved them down into Bloomsburg and have seen some incredible things happen as far as growth and reaching into the community now since moving them there. And last one I'll just point out, this is our Cole Township location. This is a part of the state most of you have never been to. This is Shamokin. What's real cool about this one is this one was started by a couple that were just volunteers. They were just passionate about what God is doing in our church, and it was Vince and Crystal Hoover, and Crystal grew up in Shamokin, and no one moves back to Shamokin, but she told her husband Vince, she said, I think we need to move back to Shamokin, because there are people there who need to know Jesus, and there's not a church like this anywhere around. And so they moved back to Shamokin and just started inviting people into their homes, and that group of 5 grew to 10, and 10 grew to 15, and 15 grew to 20, and eventually they kind of came to us and said, what do we do? And so we got them a tiny little storefront in a shopping center across the street from Walmart, because everyone in Cole Township knows where Walmart is, right? And so it was a really recognizable location. We got them 3,000, 4,000 square foot storefront. And I think a couple of weeks ago, they had over 100 people show up to that location. And so it's just incredible to see what's happening. The other thing that's real cool about this from a financial standpoint is that while all this expansion has been happening, all this growth has been happening, we've actually reduced our mortgage over the last several years from $28 million to $3 million, which is just kind of an amazing story. And so the reason I share some of these numbers is actually, whether it's financial numbers or the locations that we've launched, it's really because it's about people. And so let me just share 2 other numbers that are about people, because these are amazing to me. Over the last 3 years, here at our church, 3,724 people have told us that they are trusting Christ with their lives for the very first time, have stepped into a relationship with Christ. Half of that number, almost half of that is children, is kids. This whole trajectory, so eternity has shifted. If you were here last week and then you were a part of this, we've baptized in the last 3 years, last 36 months, 1,542 people who've said, I'm all in. I want to go public, that I am a life changed by Christ. And so God is just writing an amazing story here. And in some ways, we're just sitting there going, man, we just want to get along for the ride. We're just going to follow where God is leading this. And so, one of the sort of convictions we've had as a church that's driven us all through the years, this question is God done with us? And we've just always come back to this assumption that no, God is not done with us. And so while as fun as it is to kind of think back about what God has been doing here at our church, we're also dreaming again now. And we're beginning to go, man, God is not done with us. And so what other opportunities might there be for us as a church to step into to pursue where God might be leading? And so I want to tell you about 3 opportunities in front of us as a church that we are very, very excited about to extend our reach and to continue to reach more people. The first one is actually an opportunity to launch a location in the West Shore region of Harrisburg. And so the West Shore is actually, it's Cumberland County, and so let me just tell you about a few things in Cumberland County. Cumberland County is actually the fastest growing county in the entire state of Pennsylvania, and so when you think about the West Shore, think Mechanicsburg, Camp Hill, Carlisle, if you think, if you're familiar with those areas. And so we've actually got a facility right now. It's the Twin Ponds. It used to be an ice skating rink. It's an 80,000 square foot facility on 8 acres. It's very well known in the region there. People know where it's at. And if you're sitting there going, man, 80,000 square feet, that's a lot of space. And that's true. We don't need all that 80,000 square feet. And so our plan at this point is actually to convert 40,000 of it, so about half of it, into a location, an LCBC location. And then to use the other half, we're going to lease that out to a tenant. And I think that does 2 things. If we lease the other half out to a tenant, first of all, it creates some revenue to help offset some of the costs, so that's a good thing. But also, it gets people into our building, into our space all week long. People that have the opportunity to be influenced positively by our staff, and by our church. So we're very, very excited about this. So the price tag on this one is, the agreement on the building is about $4.95 million. We think it's going to take about $5 million to renovate it and to get it up to where it needs to be. And the reason why we think this investment, because it's a large investment, the reason we think this is worth it is because two things. Number one, we've already got several hundred people coming from the West Shore to our Harrisburg location. So there's a group of people already ready to launch this thing. But because of the demographics of the community, because of Cumberland County and kind of where it's at and what God is doing there just with bringing people there, we think this location has the potential to grow to a couple thousand people. And so we think this is worth it as we kind of step in and go, man, God, maybe your positioning is there to reach more people. Second opportunity I want to tell you about real quick is just Lebanon. And we've been hearing for years from several of you, actually several hundreds of you, who are across all different multiple locations and who've said, man, when are we going to get into Lebanon? And so I've been waiting on the right opportunity. And then a couple months ago, a church, Tabor Church in Lebanon, came to us and they gave us their building. They actually donated this church to us, their church building, because they just want to see a life-giving church move into that community. And so let me tell you a few things about this church right here in this building that we're going to be getting into. First of all, it was established in 1792. George Washington was around in 1792. Some of you, that was right around the time you were born. So there you go. You know who you are. So it's a real old church. And something kind of cool about this actually is we sat there, and I'll just tell you real quick, as leadership, we kind of wrestled, like, can we do what we do in an old church like that? Because you see what we do every weekend, and can we really do that? And what's been real fun about that conversation is as we've kind of come back to our center and said, what is it that people tell us are the reasons that they stick here? What's the reasons that people stay at our church? And the things that we hear all the time are things like, I just felt like I came home. I felt like this was family. I felt like I wasn't judged when I came here. I felt like I was accepted for who I am. And so we just started thinking about that, and it kind of struck us as leadership. We go, well, we can do all that in that building. We can accept people as they are. We can do that in any kind of building. We can not judge. We can be a place that's loving and accepting. And so it just kind of stretched our thinking, and we get real excited about the potential of trying to be LCBC in a church building like this. A couple other things just to mention about this real quick is, again, we've got over 500 people, well over 500 people who are currently attending one of our locations. And so we think, again, that there is a strong base of people that we can launch this thing with and really begin to make an impact in the community. Now, even though the church was donated to us, apparently in 1792, they didn't need more than 2 single bathrooms, and you do now. We need a little bit more than that. So there's definitely some renovations we need to do in the building from an infrastructure standpoint, but also just to kind of make it feel like one of our churches. And so we're thinking probably just over $1 million investment into this. But again, we're thinking that the impact of this one could be huge in the Lebanon region. Last opportunity I want to tell you about real quick is our Berks location. Now, Berks has already been up and running in Leesport, but let me just tell you 2 things you probably didn't know about it. Number one, you probably didn't know that we are leasing this space, and so we don't own this building. We've been leasing this for the last several years and kind of watching what God is going to do. The second thing kind of related to that you probably don't know is Berks is actually our fastest growing location. And so out of all 12 locations, this is our fastest growing location. They're growing at over 18% a year, year over year right now. And so we just want to permanently plant ourselves here. That's what we want to do. We want to say, man, to this community, to this region, we're here to stay. And so a couple of things with this facility real quick. This is a 40,000 square foot facility. We're already seeing that community is using this facility. We've had different school events in this facility. We've had different community events. And so we're just thrilled about the opportunity to be able to influence the region and the community here by permanently planting ourselves by purchasing this property. And so the cost of this one is about $2.2 million. What's interesting about that is our mortgage for this will actually be cheaper than the lease payment that we've been making monthly. And so we actually come out a little bit better on this as well. So we're just excited. We're excited about some of the opportunities that are ahead of us. And it's real neat to see that, a couple of years ago, we just started talking about as a church, we said, if we're going to reach the state of Pennsylvania, it can't be a one size fits all model. We're going to have to get into small towns. We're going to have to get into suburban areas. We're going to have to get into cities. We're going to have to find different models of being able to launch locations in order to reach the state, in order to reach more people and see more people introduced to Jesus. And so one of the ways we talked about this a couple of years ago is we just said, look, we've got to have multiple models of launching locations. And so, one is just like, a big sort of building. This is probably our Mannheim location. That might be a $20 million facility, and we're going to reach thousands and thousands of people through that. But that's certainly not everywhere, and we can't do that every single place. And then we've got this sort of model. This is probably an $8 to $10 million model. We're 40,000 square foot. We're going to be in suburban areas or high growth areas maybe. We think that is probably $8 to $10 million locations. And so this would be our West Shore location. We think it's worth that investment because we think it can reach a couple thousand, several thousand people in the end. So that's one model that we need to move forward. So that's West Shore. Another one is just our sort of getting into smaller towns like Leesport, right? And so we're not going to go invest $8, $10 million, but $1.5 million, $2.5 million, and to reach 500, 1,000, 1,500 people at these locations, man, we say that's worth it. So this is probably our Berks model. And then we've got just our free model. This might be Cole Township, a couple volunteers saying, just start meeting in our home. This might be like Tabor saying, here's our church, do something with it. And so this is probably a little bit more Lebanon. I've kind of wrestled with this one's Lebanon because we do need to make some renovations, and so I don't know if it fits here or here, but my point is, we're going to have to go after reaching people in multiple different ways, and it's just a lot of fun, as we talked about this several years ago, to seeing this come to fruition now as we move ahead. And so the total cost of these opportunities that we're moving towards now is just over $13 million. And I know that that's a substantial price tag on this, but again, we just feel like this is an opportunity worth this investment. We feel that God is going to unleash something in these communities by stepping ahead and following through with this. And what's real kind of cool, just one other note I would just make about this is just at current giving levels for One Life, One Life is giving that's given explicitly and specifically for expansion. So if our One Life giving levels continue and our general fund giving levels continue because of our One Life giving and because we set aside in our general fund, funds for expansion, just from that, over the next 2 years, this should be paid off. This should be paid for. And so we just think it's worth it. We think it's worth going ahead. And so it's real simple what I'm asking you to do. If you're a partner here, if you've gone through our partnership process, you've gone through first steps and then our growth track and partnership process, I'm just asking you next week to show up and to vote to affirm moving ahead on these opportunities. And if you want more information about it, I'd love to give you more information. You actually have a program in your flyer that looks like this. It'll tell you a little bit more about it as well. But again, we're just real excited to expand this map and ultimately to see more lives reached and more lives changed by Christ. Now, when I was growing up, when we'd play games, we'd call timeout, and then when we were done, we'd call time in. So I'm going to call time in. We're done with that family business part that we needed to get through. And so let's call time in, and I want to get ahead, and I want to kind of move on to some things I want to talk to you about. Every now and then, like some messages that you give they're kind of really practical how-tos. Here's, easy steps, 1, 2, 3 to how to put this into practice. And then some messages are just really inspirational. And then some messages are just reminders. They're just kind of a reminder of what's most important. And I feel like that's today. I just want to offer you for the next couple of minutes, I just want to offer a few reminders of what's most important. Because we've been in this series that we've called A Better Way. And the whole sort of premise behind this series is that we want to be a group of people, a community of people who live a better way. That we think that there is a world that is yearning, that is longing for people to live a better way, that your neighbors, that your coworkers, that your classmates at school, that your roommates are waiting and desperately wanting to see people live a better way. And so we've been exploring what that would look like. And we didn't come up with the title of this series. It's actually, we just ripped this from the Bible. We actually ripped it from a passage, a statement that was made by one of the very first followers of Jesus. His name was Paul. And he writes this letter to this group of followers of Jesus who were living in the ancient city of Corinth. And he says this statement. This is where we ripped the title from. He says this statement in a letter he wrote to me. He says, but now I want to lay out a far, better way for you. In other words, I want to talk about a better way of living. And this is a teaser. This is like, okay, sit on the edge of your seats and listen to what I'm about to say next. Like, what is this better way, Paul? And then he goes on over the next chapter, in chapter 13 of 1 Corinthians, he describes and articulates this vision for love. It's a vision and it's a passage that almost all of you have probably heard at some point, whether you're religious or not, it doesn't matter. If you've been to a wedding, more than likely you've heard this passage because he starts talking about the fact that love is patient and love is kind and love does not keep a record of wrongs. In other words, the better way that Paul is saying, the better way of Jesus, the better way of following the Jesus way is a life of love. And then he ends this little section on all these descriptors of love by saying this. Listen how he describes love. He says, a better way love is a love that never gives up. It never loses faith. It's always hopeful. It endures through every circumstance. Paul says that's a better way kind of love. A love that is willing to enter into the mess. A love that's willing to get messy into people's lives even when they are at their worst. Because think about this for a second. Why would Paul need to remind us that there's going to be moments where you feel like giving up on someone, when you feel like losing faith in someone, when you lose hope, when you don't want to stick with them through every circumstance, unless that's just the nature of relationships. That's just the nature of love. And the reason why I want to tell you that is because every now and then this sentimentality sort of gets put out there, especially if you watch the Hallmark Channel. Dear God forbid you watch that channel. But if you do, that will not be in heaven one day. I can promise you that. There's this idea every now and then that we pick up on, and maybe you've heard it or maybe you felt it, and it's this: love shouldn't be this hard. Why? Who said that? Hallmark said that. Love shouldn't be this hard. No, man, love's hard sometimes. It is gritty. Love has to dig in. Love has to endure. Love gets tempted to give up. Love sometimes feels like you're going to lose faith. And here's what I know about you. As much as we want to believe that sentimentality that love shouldn't be this hard, here's what I know about every single one of you. If I were to ask you, who is it in your life that has loved you the most? The people you would tell me about would be the people who've done this for you. They'd be the people who you said, if I said, well, how do you know they love you? I don't know. They didn't give up on me when I should have been given up on. And they just stuck with me, even when I went off the rails. We long for that kind of love. To where we're loved even when we are at our messiest. And see, this is what Paul is saying. Paul's saying that's a better way. A better way love is a kind of love that loves people in their mess. Walks through it with them. And I feel like there's a sense of urgency behind these words. And throughout the New Testament, you find these first Christians sort of living with this sense that there is something really deep at stake, which is why we need to get this better way kind of love right, because there's something at stake. There's a sense of urgency. I think this is what is behind Paul's words when he writes another letter. At this point, he's writing to a group of Christians who were living in the city of Thessalonica. Say that 3 times fast. And he writes this letter to these group of Christians, and he says this, and listen to the urgency behind this. He says, pray that the Lord's message will what? Spread rapidly. That's urgent. That it will go, that it will spread rapidly and be honored wherever it goes, just as when it came to you. Now let's think about this for a second. What is the Lord's message? Pray that the Lord's message. What is the Lord's message? It's kind of simple. The Lord's message is just the really, really good news for everyone that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. That you didn't have to get your stuff together. That you weren't too far gone. That you didn't have to become a nice person for God to love you. That while you were still sinner, Christ died for you. That there is no height, no depth, no width, no length that God's love would ever leave you. Like it is inseparable, that his love is for you. Paul says that message, that everyone is created in God's image and that God loves them and wants them to live in relationship with him, that message, he says, pray that it would spread rapidly. Now, I don't know about what you think about when you see this phrase, spread rapidly, but I think of a virus. I think of like a virus. Do you guys remember when going viral was actually a bad thing? It's good now, I guess, but you remember when it was a bad thing? When something went viral, that meant you needed to put on that little white mask and walk around looking like an idiot in front of everyone because you didn't want to catch the bird flu, right? Because it was going viral. Think about this for a second. You know what Paul is saying? Pray that an epidemic, Pray that an epidemic of hope would be unleashed on your school. Pray that there would be an epidemic of love unleashed in your neighborhood, in your family. Pray that there would be an epidemic of grace that would take place in your place of work and in your community and in the people that you're in relationship with. And you think about this for a second. How are viruses spread? That's not a trick question. How are viruses spread? Viruses are spread up close and personal, aren't they? Viruses are spread face to face. Viruses are spread, when something goes viral, it happens because you share the same space as another person, that you come into close contact with someone. There's something actually deeply relational about the way that viruses spread. I actually love that this word that Paul uses when he originally wrote this letter, it can be translated as spread rapidly, but the literal meaning of this word is run. Pray that the Lord's message would run, that it would get legs, that it would go and move towards people. I want you to know that the defining characteristic and the defining mark of Jesus followers all through the centuries has been that we are a group of people who run toward people who others run from. The followers of Jesus run towards the mess of people's lives when everyone else sees that as a reason to run from them. Why? Because God runs after them. Because we want this message to spread rapidly. So let me just ask you a question. Is there anyone in your life that you don't want to share the same space with because of their mess? You don't really want the face-to-face interaction. You don't want to get involved in their mess. Is there anyone you've retreated from? Are there groups of people? It may not be, think personally for you. Are there whole groups of people, but because of the way things they believe or because of the ways they act or the value set they hold, and it's totally different than yours, that you've said, not getting close? Anyone that you've said, man, I'm not running that mess, and you've retreated from them? See, guys, listen, this is the tension that Paul is bringing up. This is the tension, is that we want to retreat from people when they are at their messiest. But that's not a better way. That's common. That's expected. That's easy. But it's not a better way. A couple of years ago, a friend of mine, her name was Bet, and I was in the atrium at one of our locations, and I'm standing there, and then Bet comes up to me, and she says, Jason, I got really good news. And I just need to tell you something because I'm so excited about this. I said, what happened? I'm so excited to hear this, right? Because she's obviously pumped up about something. She said, I joined a bowling league this week. And I said, why? Because I'm judging you right now, and you need to clarify this real quick. And she said, I'll tell you why, because it's really, really simple. She said, I started to do inventory of my life, and I started to do inventory of all my relationships, and I looked around, and I realized that every single person I know believes the same things I believe, looks like I look, does what I do, has the same values. I realized that I've stopped running towards mess. That's what she was saying. I've stopped running. I've retreated. And boy, that feels safer. But that's not how this message spreads rapidly. Not by playing it safe. Not by avoiding walking through the mess with other people. Have you stopped running? Have you stopped running into people's lives who are a bit messy? And I've thought this week a little bit like, why do we stop running in the first place? Why do we stop running? Why do we pull away and retreat from those who are messiest? And you know one of the reasons, I actually think one of the reasons is found in this little statement that Paul made, in this very subtle last statement. Just as when it came to you. That message that you're a mess and God still loves you. Do you remember when that first came to you? Or have you forgotten? Because see, what's interesting to me is that it's almost like Paul reminds us, do not forget the mess from which you were rescued. Because the further we grow detached from just how far God had to reach down to rescue us, the easier it is. Like the less we think we needed rescue, the further we get detached from that, the easier it is to stand in judgment over everyone else's messes because we forgot we're a mess too. But by God's grace, we would have stayed that way. See, you'll start to retreat when you lose sight. Paul says, man, you just remember when it came to you. Remember that? How it was such good news. Let that be your fuel. Because if you don't, you'll start to retreat and you will miss the point and you will miss the opportunities to step into the mess to see rescue happen. Last year, I came across this story, and the story just rocked me because it's just an incredibly emotional story. There were these storms that were coming through back in the spring of last year in 2017, April of 2017. There were all these storms that were coming through Texas, and they were just dumping water on East Texas. They didn't get a break. And so there were all sorts of flash floods popping up all over Texas. And on this one day in late April, there was this one storm that came through late afternoon, and it just dumped all this rain on Canton, Texas. And so flash floods, begin to swell up over the roads, into the ditches and all this kind of stuff. And so there was this family that was driving down the road, and their vehicle was actually swept off the road by a flash flood. And as it was swept off the road, it went into a ditch, along the side of the road, and the vehicle actually turned over. So it was upside down in the ditch now. And the water in the ditch was rising so much to where almost only the tires were basically not covered anymore. And so everything inside the vehicle, and where you sit and all that, it was submerged. It was full of water now. And the parents were able to get out, but they had an 18-month-old and they had a 4-month-old strapped in their car seats in that car. And if you want to watch an agonizing 5 minutes of video, you can Google this. You can go find it here today, and you see this 5 minutes where someone's filming a group of people trying to get in there and get these kids out and rescue these kids. And I grabbed a screenshot of it about a year ago because I wanted to be reminded of a few things. Number one, the story ends good for these kids. They were resuscitated, and they're doing great today, both children. But I also held on to this story, on this picture, because I think this is what it looks like when a group of people begin to live their lives with a sense of urgency to run into a mess in order to see rescue happen. And I love this because you got this guy down here who's like pushing the guy with the baby. He's pushing him up. And then you've got this other guy behind him right here who's also pushing. Then you've got this woman's hand who's reaching to pull. You've got this group of people working together to see something happen, to see rescue happen. This week as I was thinking about showing you this picture to kind of illustrate what it looks like to run into the mess because there's people who may need rescue, I honestly debated about whether I should even show this picture. And the reason why is because every single one of our heartstrings are going to get pulled when we see a baby. Every single one of our heartstrings are going to get pulled when we hear that there's a baby trapped in the water, strapped in a car seat, when there's children in there. And the reason why is because they're innocent, man. They didn't do anything. They just ended up there, and man, everything we wanted us is to find that they were rescued and to hear that they were rescued. And what's interesting is I don't know if I can show this, because if I'm talking about this as an illustration, what it looks like to run into the mess of the people in our lives, like to stay with them, to love them even in the messes, some of us might object at this point and go, yeah, hold up. But the people who have the messes in my life, they're not innocent. They're in the ditch because of choices they made. They're in the ditch because of things that they did. That baby didn't make that choice, and so they're in the ditch because of what they did. But let me just offer you a thought. Whatever feeling you felt just a moment ago, whatever feeling you felt, whatever anxiety you felt, whatever angst you felt when I told you about that baby right there being submerged in that water and trapped, whatever feeling you felt when I told you that baby was resuscitated and is alive and is doing fine today, that feeling of relief and joy, whatever feeling you felt about that baby that you will never ever meet, Can I just tell you that if you were to multiply that feeling infinitely, it would not even begin to scratch the surface of how God feels about every person walking this earth right now. Because he created them. They're his kids. The people who are the messiest. And the people that we look at who are the messiest people in our life, right? And we sit there and we go, man, we say things like, well, look, they just screwed up. That's why they're in the position they're in. And they're a lost cause and there's not a lot of hope. And I know, like they made their own mess and all that. And we have all these reasons for not going into the mess because we're like, look, they're there because they got there and because of the decisions they made. And God is saying, well, maybe they're just trapped. Maybe they're just trapped. As were you. And my love rescued you. And so I'm sending you into the water. I'm sending you into the mess. Remember, my message, I want it to spread rapidly, and it needs some legs. I want it to run. You're the legs. So I'm sending you to a better way kind of love for those people. Because that is a better way. It is a better way. Is it a life that wades into the mess because of rescue? And here's what I can promise you, that nobody who drove by that scene that day, nobody who drove by and went to the safety of their home, no one is sitting here today talking about that day. If you drove on, no one's sitting there talking about that. But here's what I can guarantee you. If we had any one of those people right there who were involved in that rescue, if we had any one of them up here today and we said, tell us about the events of April 29th, 2017, they could tell you in detail every minute of what happened. Because they were in it. And they ran into a mess. And I've told you guys before, and I'll just say it again, that one of my greatest hopes for you, one of the things I hope so desperately you get the privilege of experiencing at some point in your life, is that at some point there is someone who, when they talk about how they came to faith in Christ, when they talk about how their heart has been transformed, when they talk about how they were once trapped and have been rescued, when they talk about their faith journey, they talk about you. They mention your name. Because you kept loving them when no one else would. Because you kept praying for them. Because you invited them and you kept inviting them. Because you sat down for countless coffees and you answered questions that you didn't even know the answer to, but you went and you said, I'll find out the information, I'll come back, and you had honest debate and dialogue about faith. And they mention your name as an agent of rescue. Because you love them even in the mess. We are surrounded by people in need of rescue, trapped, messy. But rescued people rescue people. There's a song over the last couple of months, I'll be honest, it's kind of grabbed a hold of my heart related to this. And I think the reason why this song has grabbed me so much is because it's challenged me. It's challenged me to ask myself again, am I still running into messes? Am I still willing to run into messes in order to see that God might do something in people's life, that God might rescue them? And the song's actually called Rescue. There's a couple of lines that I just want to point out that have struck me. One of the lines says, I hear you whisper underneath your breath. I hear your SOS, your SOS. And this line strikes me because I remember me. I remember when I called out SOS. I remember calling out to God. I am a mess and I need you to rescue me. I remember that day. It goes on to say this, I will send out an army to find you. That's what God is doing. He's sending an army of people who are committed to spreading rapidly this message, to entering into the mess. He says, I'm sending out an army to find you in the middle of the darkest night. It's true. I'll rescue you. And he says, I will never stop marching. That's running. I'll never stop marching to reach you. I'm going to pursue you. And in the middle of the hardest fight, it's true, I will rescue you. And so I just want to close today by us hearing this song. And there's two perspectives that I think you can hear this song from. Some of you are here today, and I want you to hear this song from the perspective as the one, because you're here today and you're the one who, you're like, I've got an SOS out right now. I am an absolute mess. And you've wondered whether or not God can do something with your mess. You've wondered if you are too far gone from God. And I hope you hear loud and clear today, you are not too far gone. That God has sent an army, that God would knock down every wall, that God would do whatever he could to close the gap between you and him. And he's inviting you today, saying, come home to me. I will never stop pursuing you. I will never stop loving you. But I think there's a second perspective, and that's for those of us who are here and we've been rescued. We've placed our faith in Jesus. Jesus has reached down and rescued us out of the mess. Maybe the perspective you need to listen to this song from is, are you still joining? Are you still a part of that army going out in search to love people in their messes? Are you the legs? Or have you retreated? Jesus, I'm so grateful that there is no mess that you will not wade into. That there are no choices we've made. There are no paths that we have walked that have made us too far gone from you. Thank you that you've rescued us. God, I pray that we would be reminded today of the opportunity you've given us to run into the messes of people's lives, to walk with them, to love them with a love that endures through every circumstance. And I pray that in your name, Jesus.